So we'll go back to 6 department recommendations. Contract purchasing ordinance, and who do you want me to turn this over to? You? I will turn it over to you. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. This is a new document that basically gets rid of a couple of our old policies and combines them into one, hopefully more cohesive and consistent policy. I know this was emailed out. I'd like to have Scott speak to some of the changes that we've made in here. Again, there may be some changes in here that we want to see different, but this is the policy as it's coming out right now. We do have today to talk about it and tomorrow. That's a last ditch effort if we needed to change anything. However, we feel that we're trying to move to more consistent numbers across the board and definitions, all of that, so that everything is from one policy to the next is consistent. So that's where this is coming from. We asked Scott to look into this quite some time ago. Scott, if you'd like to talk a little bit about it, and then we can ask some questions about it. Maybe speak to some of the new things in it.
Yeah. So we had heard some concerns from a number of people that we had both a procurement ordinance and a contracting policy, and there was some seeming misunderstanding as to how the two dovetailed together. There were also various exceptions to the need for contract approvals, and those exceptions had various price levels or price points on them. We had some question as to whether purchases were contracts and so forth. So the idea was to merge the two together and have just a single policy. If you look at what we have, it incorporates all of the bidding requirements, all of the other requirements we had in the procurement ordinance. And then we have under the contracting policy, if you go to Article 2, Section 2.1, it says, except as otherwise specifically provided in this ordinance, all county contracts, all county purchases, and all county contract amendments and change orders require the commission's approval, and then we list some exceptions. What we've done in the exceptions then is change the dollar amount. Previously we had some at $35,000, some at $10,000, some at $100,000, and we've changed it to be consistent where any contract of $25,000 or over requires commission approval, and that includes contracts or purchases that accumulate over $25,000 in value in any fiscal year. It also then lists other exceptions, which are basically carry-throughs of the exceptions from before. We consolidated and reworded some things, hopefully to make them more clear, but there aren't significant changes in that. If you go to Section 2.5, we're requiring, this ordinance would require documentation to be submitted on the board sync system for all purchases that results in a payment of $10,000 or more in any fiscal year, or which lasts 3 or more fiscal years, that those be entered into the board sync system, and then the board will decide whether or not those contracts and purchases require board approval. Or board staff will decide whether it has to go for board approval. We also, in Section 2.6, indicated that change orders, amendments, and modifications require board approval if they're over 5% of the original contract price. The purchasing provisions, as I said, in Article 3 are pretty much the same. We reworded some things to make them more clear, but the idea was to carry through those same bidding requirements and so forth, not to substantively change them. In some places, the wording needed to be cleaned up. In Article 4, we deal with exceptions to the competitive bidding requirements. And what we did was, again, consolidate all of the provisions where we had exceptions to the competitive bidding requirements for small purchases, emergency purchases, and for sole supplier contracts, for purchases at auctions, and professional services and other kinds of things. those are now all in one article where it will be easier for somebody to go through and track what's required in those exceptions. And then Article 6 is a new provision that deals with penalties and consequences for violating the ordinance. We've pointed out that contracts that fail to comply with the ordinance are void. That's basically incorporating what common law would provide anyway. We indicate that those who violate the ordinance could be subject to personnel actions, and that it's misfeasance in office to do it. And we've indicated that it could also be a misdemeanor for violation of the ordinance, another common provision in local ordinances. Those are highlights of what the major differences are. If you have questions, I can answer those.
Okay, before we take questions, and I don't see any on the iPad, I'm going to take a motion to recommend to move forward to full board. Is there a motion? Moved by Gillette. Is there support? Supported by Kraft. Okay, we have Andre Duge, Commissioner Duge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there, I was under the impression that we were, that the bottom line was 30,000? Is there, that's what I thought.
It had been, for some purposes, it was 10,000, for some purposes, it was 35,000, for some purposes, it was 100,000. We just chose to put in 25,000. It can be at any number you want it to be.
Well, I was asking if the reasoning behind going to 25 from 30, because I was under the impression that 30,000 was the.
Go ahead.
First of all, it was 35 on the one you were thinking. There was nothing that was 30. But as Scott said, there was so many different provisions depending on which ordinance you were under. There was 10,000 for one. There was 100,000, maybe even 250 for capital projects funds. There was a number of different numbers in there. So we picked 25 at this point. At the end of the day, there's no necessary rhyme or reason. No. We don't have I mean, 35 when we picked it last time, there was no necessary.
Well, that was it. I never understood why we had 30 to begin with.
Well, it's 35 again.
Well,
but nonetheless, okay. but nonetheless, there was 10 on some, there was 100 on there. The main thing of this is trying to get where every different contract, every different purchase, every capital project, everything that we look at, there's a consistent number behind it.
Well, I think it's good that we have consistency.
And I'm sure we're going to hear at least something from somebody on wanting to, this number to be at a different level, and that's.
That goes into the next question that I have is sorry, but it's food procurement, and I remember going through all this nonsense at the jail. That we had to rebuild, redo the food service and so on and so forth at the jail. Is this food procurement portion of this related to jail expenditures on the food and so on and so forth, the people that are contracted to feed the prisoners?
The food procurement is just a carryover from your last ordinance. I didn't touch that at all.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to know, because I'm seeing this and I'm.
Right, it's just a carryover.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Myjack.
Thank you. I didn't know I was on the list that quick. I just have sort of a question about page number 13, the contract amounts, local preference percentages. I guess I'm asking this to anybody in the board if they know this. The 5%, 3%, 1%. How did we come up with those amounts in the past? I wasn't here during that time period. I'm wondering, does anybody know? Sure. So I'm talking about the local preferences, the bidding, and we're trying to get a Macomb County company to win a bid. I'm looking at these numbers. I'm just doing some math, as examples. Okay. And I'm just wondering if those numbers could or should be adjusted so that, a Macomb County company could get a preference, could get a better preference. Commissioner Carabelli looks like you
Yeah,
have.
Commissioner Carabelli.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Great question. Those were real minimum numbers we put in at first. We didn't want to get crazy with the taxpayers' dollars
Right.
on giving contracts,
Right.
but also taking in consideration that these companies who are paying taxes in our county to kind of make sure that it's brought to the table. And we said we could always go back and adjust those if we needed to. And if I'm not mistaken, there's only been less than one handful, less than a handful, and maybe only 2 or 3 that I'm aware of that ever came into play,
What, a Macomb County preference?
that it actually happened.
Happened where they came a little bit above and they got it because they're.
With the difference.
Okay.
So, maybe I think it honestly does need to go back, and that was something that we would have to talk to the executive's office and Lynn to see where their thoughts are. But it was just a start, and we didn't
Right,
want it to be
right,
crazy at first.
What's that?
Guessing there's probably some legal threshold too that you can't give
Yeah.
too much preference to. Really?
I mean, you know, you look here at as at an example of, let's say, $1 million project, so 1%. So as an example, if a Macomb County company bid $1 million and a Texas company bid $990,000, we would pay $10,000 more and get the Macomb company. And it's
So-
just you know, it's, like, is that enough or not? I don't know. I mean, you're paying more for a project, but then the company here is getting it. And I don't want to belabor this in this meeting now.
No, what my thought process was is it's a legitimate thing for us to look at. I think that what we have to focus on today are the changes that were already
Okay.
put in here, but that doesn't prohibit us from even bringing it back a month later and changing those numbers.
I'll look at this in a future
So-
meeting and talk with Lynn and Polly.
Sure, and we can go back and just change just that at any time that we want to. So that's what my thought process
Okay.
is today. I
'Cause
think we should be open to it.
Residents are very happy with that we give a Macomb County preference. And I'm just wondering, and I don't know this, is this too much or too little of a preference? I don't know. But I
Okay.
will explore this with you guys in the
Okay.
future, okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see anybody else. Is there nobody else has any questions? Okay, we've got the motion, so please vote on your iPad. Motion, well, it says it passed. Did she already vote?
Elizabeth's not on. Okay, it does pass. Just don't know if it passed all the way.
You're voting yes. Okay.
All right, let's try.
We're all gonna vote again? It shouldn't have shown up here. Oh, okay, motion passes 11-0. Okay, item 6B, Appropriations Ordinance, and again, I will turn it over to Chair Smith.
Thanks. We have a couple different things, obviously, in the appropriations ordinance to look at today. First, though, I would like to bring up Mr. Doug Deeter to the podium. We've talked about this before. We hired the Rehmann Group to take a look at our procedure as a board and how we look at different items budgetarily. The first one that we had them look at was how we look at the capital projects fund and what we do with that. We asked them to look at our process and tell us what they thought as a professional organization we were doing right or wrong and how we should look at doing things in the future. So we have a report on your desk from them that you can take with you to read over tonight. A lot of the beginning portions of this are basically, when you'll notice, they're the different rules of the charter and the different contracting policies and such, and it gets towards the end where the options are what they would recommend for us to move forward with. So I'm going to let Mr. Deeter speak a little bit on this, and then if anybody has any questions of him. So, Doug, please.
Thank you. As Mr. Smith said, we were asked to take a look at what your current processes are around the budgeting for the capital project fund and how that money gets transferred from the general fund to the capital project fund, and the oversight the board has related to that. So what we did, we started with just reviewing what's currently in place. We looked at your current policies, procedures, charter, different ordinances and that type of thing. And like Mr. Smith said, that's what's the first part here, is lays out what parts of those ordinances, policies, and stuff that relate to what we're taking a look at. So I guess what I'd like to do is just, if you'd like to go to page 4, and we'll just take a quick look at the different options we've laid out. So currently, our understanding is that the board will appropriate a certain amount of funds annually to the capital project fund, and then certain projects are paid out of that fund. But there's really no oversight from the board perspective of how those projects are moving along, where they over budget, under budget, or that type of thing. So we were asked to take a look at that and provide some ideas of how the board can take a little more active oversight in these projects going forward, maybe make the expenditures out of the capital project fund a little more transparent, and that type of thing. So the first option we came up with was, instead of transferring a set amount each year that's supposed to cover all the capital projects during the year to the capital project fund, our suggestion would be to do it on a project by project basis. And this comes from some of our other clients where they will set up a separate capital project fund for each capital project. So, and then they adopt a budget for each fund. And therefore, that oversight comes because they have the budget for that capital project fund. So the difference here is it's all going into one fund, and then the projects are being spent out of there. So if the board were to approve a budget transfer from the general fund to the capital project fund based on each individual project, and that basis would be, once the project is let out to bid, saying here's what we estimate the cost is going to be. Okay, the board can approve that project, transfer that amount of money to the capital project fund, and it's earmarked for that project. And then once that's approved, the funding has happened, and the project starts and continues on, then the board should take a look at how that is progressing. So get regular reports, depending on the size of the project, obviously. Some budget to actual of, okay, we budgeted the project is going to be X. We're 10% through, and we spent X on it, or something to that effect, just so the board has some oversight and some idea of how the projects are getting completed and which projects are getting completed. And of course, all this would be based on the contract levels that you guys mentioned earlier of, the different approval processes to approve the contractors and that type of thing. So the second, any questions on that option before I move on to the next one? Okay. The second option we looked at was, instead of allocating the full amount for the year, so the request was $20 million for 2018, or whatever the number might be, allocate that in portions. So say allocate 20%. Once that 20% is spent, then it comes back to the board with, okay, here's the projects, here's the status of the projects, where the money went. Now we're requesting the next allocation of 20%, or whatever it might be. And again, that gives the board the oversight of seeing which projects are being completed and how those are being completed within the estimated amounts that were given to the board initially. So both these both these options would require multiple budget amendments within the general fund to amend the budget for the transfer out to the capital project fund, depending on which option you chose to do. Any questions on that option?
Yeah, because we said we're just not going to do it, right?
I don't have any speakers. If you want to go ahead and go through, and if they have questions, they'll put it on here.
Okay.
Thank you.
The last section is, we were asked to take a look at your annual appropriations ordinance. And yes.
You know what, I do have a question, and
Sure.
I might have missed something here, Doug. It looks like we had option 1 and option 2, but then right after that, you talked about the progressive approach. When we talked about the 13 million, I kind of talked about that afterwards with you, that was a rollover. Yep. That you know, either we could try to figure out a way to put it back in the general fund, or maybe that might be a good way to kind of almost combine option 1 and 2 by starting off with a fair amount of money into that fund, but then rolling into, and I just read that, that's their last part, I just want.
Yep, and thank you for that. It's on the bottom of page 5 of our letter here, and what Mr. Smith is referring to is there's approximately $13 million left in the capital project fund currently. That, you know, our suggestion is you leave it there and use it as the pre-funding, either to wrap up projects that have already been approved or already started and ongoing, and start these options as progressive going forward, and not change the way that $13 million was handled in the past.
It also would put a certain amount of money in there for emergency situations where there's no time to contact the board as well, if that money's in there, right?
Sure. Yeah, that could be used for, you know, change orders and that type of thing that, you know, should come back to the board for approval as well, but
I
at least the
mean,
money's there.
If something big happens, you know.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
There are provisions in the charter and in the,
In this
and all
as
of
well,
that,
okay.
that allow the executive to spend money on an emergency basis for a number of different things. So if there was an emergency.
You're correct, I
That's fine.
don't know what I was thinking for a second there, go ahead.
So,
Okay. So then the last section is on page 6, and this was, we took a look at your previous year appropriations ordinance and tried to provide some suggestions for changes to that for this next upcoming fiscal year, some ways to modify that to incorporate some of these options that we have put forth as, you know, the improvement to the oversight of the capital projects. Okay.
Okay, we have Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you've given us the 2 options, and in option 1, you'd indicated that this was one that you were at least familiar with some of your other clients that have used option 1. Are those other clients county governments or other forms of government agencies that have?
Well,
if you could tell us.
No, I can. And I don't have any clients that have that exact option.
Okay.
But what they're doing is they're setting up a separate capital project fund for each project, and then a separate budget for each capital project fund. So it's a little more detailed, and that's kind of where our suggestion's coming from. Is that's a good way to monitor each project on a project by project basis. So, but there's counties, there's cities, a little bit of everything that use that approach.
That use option 1 approach. And let me just ask you this, so like when you say that they set up a budget within the capital budget plan, so for example, if we were working on a garage, a parking garage, there would be an item parking garage as part of the capital project improvement budget or plan, I guess?
Yes, yes, if they have, smaller projects are sometimes flowed through one fund, and
Gotcha.
they'd have separate line items, and then the board would approve the budget for that project within that fund. Other bigger projects, if you're doing a building,
Right.
let's say, that's gonna have a separate capital project fund.
Gotcha.
That's totally
Okay.
separate, all by itself, so only the sources coming in and going out of that fund are related to that one project.
I got you. Because when you looked at what we do, it appears that we have just one big giant capital.
Well, that's
Right.
where the money's going to from the general fund, is into one big capital project fund. Now, it looks, almost looking at your audit report, that, you know, some of that comes out, it gets transferred to other funds and gets spent in other funds. But the big lump sum is going to the capital project fund, and then from there, you know, I don't feel the board has as much oversight over those funds once it gets into the capital project fund.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Romano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. So that I have it clear in my mind, right now, when we have all this money in the capital fund, if I'm interpreting what you've written out here, you're saying that every type of large fund that we have, we should have a separate account for, so that X number of dollars goes into that account, and we can kind of oversight what is being spent in that account. My question is, what's the difference if we have a capital fund account, put all the money in there, and then as these projects come up, ask for the cost as it's being drafted out of this capital account per line item. Wouldn't that be a lot more simpler than opening up 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 funds for certain projects? I'm just asking.
That could be an option. I'm not suggesting you open up all these new funds. I'm just suggesting that you fund the capital project fund based on specific projects. So therefore, that's what the budget is set at. Therefore, there's your responsibility at that level to monitor the budget to actual. So you don't need to set up all these different funds. That's one way to do it, but that does get a little more complicated. But if you only transfer money from the general fund to the capital project fund based on specific projects, you have one project that costs $1 million, okay, we're gonna fund that project, money comes from the general fund into the capital project fund, and it's specific to that one project then.
Same question, I guess the same question applies. And so if all of this money is in the capital fund project and they come to us and say, let's just use their money to remodel the whole floor, and we're gonna need $600,000 for that, and that's a line item, and they go above that, they're gonna come back to us for additional funds. We will have control of that. I'm just trying to see how, what we're doing now is I don't wanna say incorrect, but I think we're doing what you're saying, only in a different roundabout way.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that once this money goes in the capital project fund, there's a list of, let's say, 50 projects.
Right.
Okay? That make up $20 million. If only 10 projects are done and eats up that $20 million, they're not coming back to you for more money until next year, and and another list of projects is submitted, correct?
Yes.
So this is allocating money for specific projects instead of a list that may or may not get done.
Got it.
And again, it just helps the transparency of where the money's going once it goes into that fund.
I got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Caravelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is, we, today, and what we've done in the past, and what your other clients have done, they line item in a capital project fund. Where our department wants to spend X amount of dollars, we don't have it in the budget, but we put $500,000 a year until we reach that mark, and it's in that line item, and that's what it's used for. We also use it as X amount of dollars left over in the general fund, saying we want to keep a minimum of X. So how would, being that we're not going to individually line item them, and it's going to stay in the general fund, you've got a threshold you want to keep. You follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Is that discussed in the budget, and they're tentatively brought forth at that time? Because they're not separate line items, but we got to say, hey, this money in the general fund is going to be going throughout the year to these projects. Right. How do you document to say, all right, we're taking $20 million, will be coming out of the general fund to go to capital projects, and they'll be sent over each time, however it's worked out. Mm-hmm. So you're just going to say the general fund is $20 million less as you're figuring out everything out on your percentages? Go ahead. I don't know if that came across.
Chair Smith wants to respond.
I just want to ask a question onto that, because I know that I don't know if you mentioned or I'd heard some, when you put money earmarked for something else in the general fund, you can call them restricted dollars or something. You could say
they wouldn't be restricted. They would be, essentially what you do is you take a portion of the fund balance of the general fund and set it aside. So it's not available for other purposes. So you have options: assigned fund balance or committed fund balance. Committed is the board has made a formal motion to set money aside.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that, because we want to keep that balance.
Certainly.
The next question would be, Madam Chair, to keep going, and I don't know if this is for you or for Steve, would this be a benefit for us when they looked at, like, at our bond capacity, if the money is in the general fund and not in a capital fund? Would that help us?
That might be a better question. I don't know, with Scott maybe even.
Or Steve.
Right behind you.
Steve, if you don't mind me asking.
The more money we have in the general fund, the better our bond position. So the caveat to that is, if we only transfer from the general fund to the capital improvement fund what we need to fund projects in any particular year. It's kind of what we do now. So, we won't be transferring any excess cash to the capital improvement fund. If we did that, we would go to the bond rating agencies and say, here's our discretionary fund balance, if you will. It could be general fund, the delinquent tax fund, could include that fund balance in the capital projects fund. So,
Right now, we don't do the capital project fund as far as fund balance, correct?
correct.
Right, but if it's in our general fund, it would actually, I'm asking the question because I don't know, would that be a benefit
Yes, it would.
for our bond rate? Okay, I
Right,
just-
but if we spend the money on the projects, it's not gonna be in the fund
No,
anyways.
I understand, but at that time they go to look.
Right.
Just
Right,
wanted to
but-
ask the question.
Keep, okay. I'll
All right,
just-
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and seek a motion and get it started, but go ahead and,
Sure, and I just wanted to finalize this with saying that, you know, between what you talked about with option one and option two, I think we discussed this, and I discussed it with several of you, that, and even with Executive Delden and Mr. Smeagol, that it looks like what I put in here seemed like the best option of both to roll the $13 million over, to give plenty of lead time to get to this, I guess, used to the new method, but then from then on, doing the project-by-project basis. So I kind of, I guess, used what you said was the progressive approach to the fiscal year, and it was basically a general combination of 1 and 2, and that's how I put it into the ordinance. So just so you know, so thank you.
okay, so I'm going to start by seeking a motion to approve the ordinance or move it on to full board with the change on page 3, item F. You have a change in front of you, and I'm going to seek the motion and support, and then I will have Scott speak to the change. Is there a motion? Moved by Drollet, support by Kraft. Okay, so we'll have you speak to the change.
If you look at the second sentence there, it's considerably shorter. It just says, no additional staff positions identified in the recommended budget are authorized by this ordinance. Yeah, she already referred to F. So, and the idea with there, originally, we thought we were gonna come up with a list of positions that were going to be funded in the interim, and it was decided after consultation with the, with Mr. Delden yesterday that it was better just to not fund any additional positions for right now until that study comes in.
Or all of them, was the conversation.
Right, just not fund any of them at this point until. Okay.
Okay, right now I don't have any other, okay, we'll go, okay, Commissioner Carabelli.
Can't hear you.
Shall be reclassified until the study. It doesn't mention any of the new hires, or did I miss that?
It's, the next sentence said, no additional staff positions identified in the recommended budget are authorized by this ordinance.
Last sentence.
In that same paragraph.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that we have Deputy Executive Delden here. Mr. Delden, I have a couple questions for you, if I may ask him. Good to see you, Mark. Have you had a chance to see the Rehmann report at all?
I have not.
Okay, you've not seen the Rehmann report. Okay. And have you had a chance to see the ordinance that we're about to?
I saw one, I was given one this morning by Steve Smeagol. If there have been changes to that since this morning, then I've not.
Okay. Oh, so you have not had you've had a chance to see one earlier?
As of, when did you get this one? Yesterday afternoon? This morning. So I haven't seen anything. If anything's been amended since 11 o'clock this morning, I've
Okay.
not.
Have you had a chance to review what you were given earlier?
Yes.
Okay. And if I may, I just, do you have any comments or things you would like to say that just to,
Yeah.
Mr. Delph?
well, I don't want to give them the floor too much, but I just want to hear their perspective. You know what I mean? It's only fair, right?
I appreciate that, Commissioner
Yeah.
Leonetti. I guess just based on what I've heard moments ago from the gentleman from Rehmann, and what I've read in the draft ordinance, I guess probably, for lack of a better term, I'm disappointed because I think things have run pretty well the last 5 or 6 years with the procurement and contracting ordinance that we've had, with the way the capital plan funding has worked. The methodology that's used today with the capital fund has been in existence pre-executive, where it's funded every year. The facility and operations supervisor is the one who determines what projects are going to move ahead over a certain threshold amount. All those contracts come back here. What I feel is happening right now, and this is just very preliminary, and I know you're not adopting the budget until tomorrow, but I kind of feel like the noose is tightening primarily on the executive's office because he controls most of the general fund dollars because of the number of departments that fall under his jurisdiction. But to go from, and you haven't talked about it yet, but to go from fund transfers, it used to be, and it's been working fine. I've heard nobody say otherwise. It's gone from a department head being able to transfer 10% between line items of a cost center, not to exceed $100,000. Now it's going to, I think, 5% and $25,000. I'm not sure what went wrong, what has prompted the change. And then to hear what you may be considering regarding the capital plan. I mean, you talk about slowing down services provided, talk about slowing things down. You know, this board, not just this board by way of your draft resolution, but previous boards have, for good reason, prided themselves on the number of meetings and the number of hours that you spend 3 or 4 months asking every department head to come up here, every elected official, asking numerous questions. You ask really good questions, and then there's follow-up questions that get emailed to them later. You do so much good work before you adopt the budget, but just by way of example with the capital plan, now you want us to seek permission to spend every dollar out of the capital plan because there's no money in it, or there won't be in a short period of time. And for us to have to come back here to replace the carpet in some office for $5,000 or $7,000, we're talking about wasting a lot of time. Apparently, we've been doing something wrong, or you don't feel you've been providing enough oversight. So I'm telling you exactly how I feel right now, with all due respect to Commissioner Leonetti. I appreciate you asking me. I wasn't going to say anything unless I was asked.
Well, like I say, we're here to take a look at all sides, and we're here to be a check and balance on everything.
The $35,000, I think, has worked well, but now today it sounds like it's going to $25,000. Creates a lot more work for our department heads. Okay. Apparently, we're not managing the money. We're not being good stewards or good budget managers of our departments. Or maybe you feel you've not been good stewards of the money. But it's going to create a hardship. But it ultimately is your call.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I appreciate your perspective. That's why I asked the question. It's always important in considerations. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any changes that are done today will be given to your office before tomorrow, so that you have a, you know, we had one little change that just took place today, and anything else that takes place, we're going to have provided to your office before tomorrow, so you get a chance to look at that in case there's anything new in here that you would like to speak to as well.
Yeah, I guess just for the sake of efficiency, I don't know. A lot of that terminology in your Appropriations Ordinance, I don't understand. And I'm going to have to consult with others in our office because there's quite a few changes to the ordinance, especially in where the sanctions are toward the end. I don't know what all of that means, and I haven't taken the time to read it. I was more focused this afternoon on the areas that I just discussed.
Okay. And we can give this one to you today, and if there's anything else, we can make sure that you get it as well. I want to make sure you have everything before tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay. I have something, but I'm going to go to Commissioner Myjack.
Okay, well, my questions, comments sort of relate to this one-page form here. I do support holding any new and reclassification positions. I just talked to Karen, and Karen, if you can get this to me, I'd just like to know how many positions we have added since we, as we all know the history from the Great Recession, we held positions, froze positions, eliminated jobs through attrition, which really helped us get out of the budget crisis that we had. We were this close to laying off people, and that's my reason to ask you for that. And one thing, commissioners, that hasn't been really talked about, where I'm coming from, I'm only speaking for myself, is I'd like to see a millage reduction to go back to half, at least, of what the millage was, because we did raise it. Taxpayers helped out. Everybody had to help out in the county during our budget crisis, and times are getting a little bit better now, and employees are getting raises again. That's a good thing. We're in a surplus now. The budget's balanced. That's a good thing. But I'm also wearing the hat of not just being a commissioner and county employee, but looking at their taxpayers as well. So that's where I'm coming from, and if that's $5 million a year is what I'm looking at. Going from where it is right now to about 4.35 mils. Okay, so that's about a $5 million loss of revenue, and certainly, as we know, personnel costs are the most expensive part of county government. So, but I do support this. The classification study, that will be interesting to see what comes out of that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Chair Smith.
Thank you. So I guess some of this we'll just talk about the capital projects and the Appropriations Ordinance. Early on in the meeting, when Commissioner Duge was talking about the $25,000 and where $35,000 came from and where $25,000 came from, I was quick to point out that those are numbers that are generally we kind of agreed to. There's no real number behind it, and I'm not locked into 25,000. Let's start with that, okay? Number two, the $25,000 budget line item move is also a part of trying to make everything consistent across the board, where we have, and I've heard it from different people in finance and different departments, where they don't even know what they're able to do, depending on what ordinance they're under, what they're looking at. So the $25,000 in that instance is simply to make everything consistent. Now, is it 25? Is it 30? Is it 35? I'm sure that as all of you would be, I would be open to discussion on this. And we've had this discussion also with Chair Delden that we opened this line of communication yesterday, and we're going to carry it on and through tomorrow's final vote. When we talk about capital projects, there should be no capital projects that get slowed up because of having $13 million to start and having it run out and having to slow down government to come to us, because a capital project is a project that's planned. It should be a capital project that we've thought out, we know it's coming, at least in a sufficient amount of time to come to our board to talk about it. That being the case, if something does come up that's quicker than normal, we still have the bypass route on things. So we will not be slowing down government or stopping government. I'm sure that, I don't think we've ever got to that point where we've said no when there was something that needed to be done. And last but not least, I don't know where $5,000 to $7,000 coming to the board for carpet comes from, because I can't, and if something in there says that, please let me know, because I would be happy to change that immediately, because that is by no means the reasoning or the effect that we want this ordinance to have. So that being said, I don't have a problem passing it today as 25 and amending it tomorrow to a different number that may be more appropriate, or listening to anybody today to talk to the difference in the numbers that they might want to see. We looked at this from our own point of view. How do we look at this? We're the budget, appropriations, this is our job to look at this budget. When I looked at doing this and talked to you about hiring a company, it was to look at our practices and are we doing the job we should be doing? And quite honestly, you know, and I know Doug's been kind of understated about it, but I don't think they've ever seen where any private or governmental agency drops upwards of $30 million into a fund off of proposed projects that aren't even mandated projects. They're not projects that have to happen. That being said, I thought the board needed to up its game a little bit on how we should see things, how we should look at things, how if something goes wrong, the finger is going to get pointed right back at us. We should look at our own procedures. This has nothing to do with how anybody else has been doing things, and just because we've been doing things a certain way doesn't mean we should keep doing things that way. And quite honestly, this has been going on for a long time. The old board did it before the executive, but the old board was in charge of everything soup to nuts. They did the budget, they oversaw the budget, they appropriated the money for the budget. So it's a little different on talking about 7 years ago and beyond than it is now. And although things, I think, are going relatively well, if we ever stop looking at better ways to do things, we shouldn't be here. So that's what I have to say on that part of it. And really, and I'll give you the same thing with any of these. I put out what I think people wanted to have out here after a lot of discussion, whether it's the capital projects fund, whether it's the positions, whether it's anything else that we proposed out here. So we've all had a lot of time to talk about this, and there's still time to make changes. So thank you very much.
Okay, so before I call on Commissioner Romano, I'm actually going to propose an amendment, and I'll see if I get support. On page 2 of 6 of the ordinance where the chart is, I would like to add an E and a F. E is C19 of the budget, Board of Commissioners, expenditure, contract services, minus 6550.
Whoa, slow down, slow down.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you'll know exactly what it is. I'll explain it, yeah. Yeah, the chart at the bottom.
Page 2. Page 2, at the back of page 1.
The Appropriations Ordinance.
Okay, I'll slow down. I'm sorry. Okay, and I'll explain what it is. Okay, so there's an E and an F. And the E would be page C19, which is Board of Commissioners, under expenditures, contract services. That would be in parentheses, so it's a deduction of $6,550. And then the F would be C19, Board of Commissioners, under expenditures, conferences and training. That would be a positive $6,550. And I may not get support, but I just want to, so that is the amendment.
Can you summarize?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, but I want to see if there's support, because if there's no support, I can't open it. Okay, support by Romano, and yeah, I'll speak to it. So I have spoken to it on a number of occasions going into today, and it has to do with, we're talking about doing a policy so that commissioners have an allotment, so that we don't have a system where some commissioners have all the, expend all the money, and then Patty, for instance, is in the position of having to tell other commissioners, no, you can't go because there's no more money. It puts the board chair and it puts Patty in an awkward position. So Chair Smith indicated he's going to be bringing forth a policy to address that. So the thought process was, the other thing with regard to what we have in there is for commissioners, and we have staff members that are trying to get training in things like the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act, and we didn't allot money for that. So if we're going to do a policy to address that, I think in the, for transparency purposes, then we shouldn't use the money out of contract services. We should use it out of that line item. So I suggested moving 6,550 just to give it an even number of 20,000, and that would be for all commissioners as well as for our board staff. So it doesn't increase the budget, it just changes where it is within the board budget. So that was my rationale for that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the iPad, and you may have, and if you vote no, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to vote on it because I've asked for 2 years in a row and haven't been able to get a vote, and haven't been able to get it into the requested ordinance, much to my frustration, because everybody keeps saying, well, we've listened and we put together what people want, and I've indicated I wanted this for a couple years in a row, and it never makes it in there, and if it doesn't pass, I am okay with that. I wanted a vote. Commissioner Romano, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to speak to that. If you would like, you can, if that's the item that we're on and you want to call for the vote, I don't have a problem with that. There's not the item. I wanted to speak, well, we're on. All right. I want to talk about my grandkids if everybody has time. I just wanted Mr. Delvin to realize it, and this commission is not challenging the executive. And this is the furthest thing that I think from all of our minds. And I think Chair Smith brought it up, and he made it very poignant when he said, the buck stops here. When this money is spent, and our constituents look at us and their eyes are crossed because we're spending this money and we can't justify where this money is going or how it's going out, in the end, we're the ones that pay for it. I just think these policies and procedures that we're putting into effect not only help us, but I really think it helps the executive, because the bottom line, again, is the commission approved it. So it kind of takes a little bit off of him and puts it back on us where it should be, because as we say, we appropriate the budget. So I just wanted to make that clear. I don't think any of us are challenging the executive. That's the last thing I think we wanted to do. And in reference to your $6,500, my suggestion was to take it from the Centennial that asked for it and put it in that project. So I don't have a problem with it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I wasn't going to do that. Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the ordinance specifically, I agree with Commissioner Romano that, you know, our job is to do the best we can to create policies that give us the best procedures for doing our job, the best opportunity to do our job. We have a financial obligation. We've got essentially kind of like one job, and that is the money part. And so we've got to ask ourselves, how can we do that the most responsibly possible? And it may sometimes create inconveniences, or it may create additional work on our behalf or additional work on other people's behalf, but you know, it's kind of like our one job. So I support the ordinance. With regard to the amendment, I wish I had more history on how things have happened in the past, so it's a little difficult for me to know, you know, what the problem was or what the procedure is. If somebody wants to attend a conference or we feel a staff person would benefit from attending a conference, do they go to the chair? Do they go to who? How do we decide where that money goes now? I'm not sure how the process has worked, being new back on the board here, to have an idea of whether or not it needs to change. You know, I just don't know. So if anybody could give a little bit more background in a succinct way, that would help me somewhat.
Just to answer that question, we don't as a board vote on our own travel. We vote if MAC pays for me to go out of state, but we don't vote on our own travel that's used the county money, which is pretty funny, I think. But
I'm not sure what that means. We don't vote on, if one of our members wants to go to a MAC conference, don't we vote on that or no?
No, we don't vote on it. We have the money in the line item, but there have been incidences where some commissioners have used quite a bit of money and other commissioners have requested to go somewhere and been denied. In this particular situation, not that any commissioners used excess money, but a lot of commissioners went to one conference. I called and inquired about going to Washington, D.C. because we got the invite, and I was told that commissioners were paying their own way. I said, okay, so I contacted Mac and I told him, I asked them, would they pay half? And I would pay half because my board won't pay for it. They said, well, we're gonna pay the full thing. But in the meantime, apparently this office paid for everybody else. And I found out by reading it in the newspaper that this office paid for everybody else. But I was told no. It's not the first time that's happened. And it's not anybody's fault. It's what we have set up here. So
Can I interrupt just to ask a question on what you just said, Madam Chair? And that is, how did the commissioners that got it paid for get it paid for? Did they go to the chair at the time and say, I'd like to go to this thing, and the chair said yes? You know.
I said it's not anybody's fault, but if you want to speak, you know what, I'm going to turn it over to the chair and let
Okay,
him speak to the issue.
I'm asking for the process. I'm not blaming anybody, obviously. There may have been
No,
the
but he's
process that was there
chomping
at
at
the
the
time.
bit, so I want to let him address that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first, I'll answer your question. Yes, it is the chair, probably just like it's a department head in every department that decides on who uses the travel and best to fit their jobs and whatever conferences are going on. So, second, I don't have any problem moving this money over there. We have never run out of money, as far as I know, for conferences and travel, at least to my knowledge. I've never asked and been told no, but I really haven't gone to many things. Third, just because I maybe inadvertently but got thrown under the bus for saying this, I was planning on paying for 2 airfares to go to Washington that were $260. Commissioner Kraft and Commissioner Kleinfeld came to me. They were the only other 2 that asked, but they both had potential for other funding sources to provide their way. Commissioner Kraft checked on his behalf, and then he came back and said they wouldn't pay. Commissioner Kleinfeld, somehow or another,
There's no need
I'd
to
apologize. No.
or,
I'm going to
you know,
tell you
for-
that we
Yeah.
missed this, and this is where I know that she's upset about it. That we would have paid for the airfare easy if Mac wouldn't have paid for it, because we made that decision after we said no. Please check with your other organizations. That being said, we are looking at a policy change coming up that would give every commissioner an allotment at least sufficient to go to a number of conferences without having to come and ask about it, because I understand that too. I was on the other side of that at some point too. So I don't have a problem with the 6,500, even though it's something that we could easily probably line item transfer if we needed to, if we ever ran out of money. But if that, either way I could go on this, so I'm not going to oppose this.
So if I may follow up, just for clarity then, the amendment before us would take
Strictly just more money.
$6,500 per commissioner or total?
No, just total out of one line item into another.
If I'm willing to, and it would set that 6,500 aside.
Into conferences and
No.
it would just add to the budget. for
It's
conferences.
just changing it from it changes it from 13,450 to an even 20,000.
Okay.
From there, a policy will be created.
Okay.
That allots money to different commissioners. It won't use up all the money because money will also be needed for staff travel. Where we had a philosophical difference is, he believes that the chair makes the determination as to whether somebody's travel is warranted to be paid for. I believe, and the reason I'm seeking an allotment for each commissioner, is that each one of us should be able to determine within a specific amount of money whether or not they're going to use that, and they don't have to use that.
That's not what the amendment specifically does today.
All it does today is move that money
From-
to the
From where to that?
from contract services.
Okay.
To that line item in preparation for the policy change. And the reason I'm doing it in preparation for the policy change is he's correct. He can move money from contract services. I think we're being more transparent if we're going to approve the policy to move it into that line item. I think we're being open about what we're doing with that policy.
And when we move it to contract services, we're not specifying in this amendment specifically what it would be used for in contract services.
We're moving it from contract services to conferences and training. So that's the line item it's going to.
Okay. Okay, so we're essentially increasing the budget for conferences and training.
And reducing the one for contract
And
services.
reducing contract services.
Okay. I apologize for taking that long. I just wanted to make sure I understood. I didn't have a very comprehensive background. So thank you.
No problem. And I want to reiterate, I don't think this is the fault of anybody here or even anybody before this. It's just the system that was in place. I'm sorry, we have Commissioner Carabelli. Okay, Commissioner Smith, did you put it back on, or?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna be voting on my amendment. Please vote. Okay, that motion passes 9-2 with Commissioner Duge and Commissioner Drillette voting no. And we'll vote on the main motion.
What's the main motion?
That's the ordinance. The appropriations
So
ordinance.
no one wanted to speak to anything else on the appropriations ordinance?
No, there were no other speakers.
Good.
Are you ready?
Yes. Okay, that motion passes 11-0.